It was June 19th, 1879. A hot afternoon in Michigan. 500 young cadets sat in their pressed uniforms at the Michigan Military Academy, their faces clean, their boots polished, their eyes full of the kind of excitement that only comes from never having seen a dead body. A man stood up to speak. He was 59 years old. His red hair had gone gray. His beard was scraggly and unkempt. His uniform, if you could call it that, looked like he had slept in it, which he probably had. He was lean, wiry, restless. His eyes moved constantly, scanning, always scanning, like a man who had spent too many years watching the tree line for musket flashes. His name was William Tecumseh Sherman, and he was about to say 3 words that would outlive every battle he ever fought, every city he ever burned, every mile he ever marched. He looked at those boys, those bright, eager, innocent boys, and he did not give them what they wanted. He did not talk about glory. He did not talk about the noble sacrifice of the soldier. Sherman paced. He always paced. His staff learned to stay out of his way. But here, on this stage, there was nowhere to pace. So he stood still, and that might have been harder for him than anything he did in Georgia. He spoke fast, almost too fast, the words tumbling over each other. That was Sherman. He did not measure his words, he did not craft them. They came out like fire, fast, hot, and impossible to stop. "I've been where you are now," he told them, "and I know just how useless it is to preach. But I want you to understand something." His voice dropped. The cadets leaned forward. "War is hell." 3 words. That was it. No poetry, no metaphor, no softening. War is hell. Period. The way Sherman always spoke, the way a blade is sharp. It cut in both directions. But here is what nobody tells you about those 3 words. Sherman did not say them to be quotable. He did not say them to make a speech. He said them because he had lived them. He had walked through that hell. He had set that hell on fire. And that hell had burned parts of him that never grew back. This is the story of how William Tecumseh Sherman earned the right to say those 3 words, and why, 160 years later, nobody has ever said them better. Before Sherman set Georgia on fire, the world set Sherman on fire, and it nearly destroyed him. Here is what the history books skip. Before he was the most feared general in the Confederacy, William Tecumseh Sherman was a failure. Not a quiet failure, not a dignified failure. A loud, public, humiliating failure. The kind of failure that makes a man stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. and wonder if the world would be better off without him. His father died when he was 9, just like that. Thomas Sherman was a judge on the Ohio Supreme Court, and then he was dead, leaving 11 children and no money. William was taken in by Thomas Ewing, a powerful senator. He was raised alongside the Ewing children. He was fed, clothed, educated. He was given every advantage, and then he married Ellen Ewing, his foster sister, the woman he had grown up with, the woman whose father had saved him. Sherman went to West Point. He did well. He graduated 6th in his class. He served in California during the gold rush. He saw opportunity everywhere, so he resigned from the army and became a banker. He failed. The bank collapsed in the Panic of 1857. Sherman lost everything: his clients' money, his reputation, his confidence. He moved to Kansas and tried to practice law. He failed again. He was not a good lawyer. He did not have the patience for it. He did not have the temperament. Sherman was honest the way a blade is sharp. It cut in both directions. Lawyers need subtlety. Sherman had none. He moved to Louisiana and became the superintendent of a military academy. He was good at it. He liked the South. He liked the people. He understood them. For the first time in years, he was happy. Then Louisiana seceded, and Sherman, the man who loved the South, walked out the door the next day. He did not hesitate. He did not negotiate. The Union was everything. Without it, there was nothing. He left the South he loved and went north to fight for the country he believed in. But the North did not want him. Not yet. The North did not know what to do with a man who spoke too fast, thought too fast, and said things that nobody wanted to hear. What happened next nearly killed him. Not a bullet, not a cannon. His own mind. In October 1861, Sherman was given command in Kentucky. It was an impossible assignment. He was responsible for holding the entire state with almost no troops, no supplies, and no plan from Washington. He knew with absolute certainty what was coming. He told his superiors he needed 200,000 men. They looked at him like he was insane. He was not insane. He was right. It would take the Union 2 years to get 200,000 men into the Western theater. But in October 1861, saying you needed 200,000 men was like saying you needed the moon. Sherman paced. He always paced. But now the pacing was different. It was frantic, obsessive. He paced the halls of the Galt House Hotel in Louisville at 3 in the morning, chain-smoking cigars, talking to anyone who would listen, and many who would not. He spoke fast, almost too fast, the words tumbling over each other. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He could see the Confederate army coming, and nobody would listen. The reporters came. They watched this gaunt, wild-eyed, chain-smoking general pacing the hotel lobby at midnight, ranting about enemy numbers that nobody else could see. And they wrote exactly what they saw. The Cincinnati commercial published the story. The headline was devastating. It said, "Sherman was insane, crazy, unfit for command." The word spread like fire through every newspaper in the North. Sherman, insane. Sherman, unstable. Sherman, a madman, given an army. He was relieved of command, sent home to Lancaster, Ohio, to his wife, to Ellen, the woman who had known him since he was a boy, the woman who understood that the line between genius and madness is sometimes just a matter of timing. Sherman stood at the edge. He later wrote that if he had foreseen the full scope of the war in 1861, he would have killed himself. This was not a metaphor. This was not dramatic language. This was a man telling the truth about the darkest moment of his life. Ellen saved him. She pulled him back. She wrote letters to his superiors defending his sanity. She stood between her husband and the abyss, and she did not move. History remembers Sherman, the general. It should also remember Ellen, the wife. Without her, there is no march to the sea. There is no war is hell. Sherman came back. That is the part that matters. He came back. Halleck gave him another chance. A small command under a general nobody believed in, a quiet man from Ohio named Ulysses Grant. Grant was not flashy. Grant drank too much. Everyone knew it. But Grant did not care what the newspapers said. When the world fell apart around him, he simply lit a cigar and figured out what to do next. Sherman looked at Grant and saw stillness, the one thing he did not have. And Grant looked at Sherman and saw fire, a mind that moved faster than anyone else's, a man who could read a battlefield the way a musician reads a sheet of music. Grant saw the fire, and unlike everyone else, Grant was not afraid of it. They found each other at Shiloh, April 6, 1862, the bloodiest day in American history up to that point. Sherman's camp was overrun at dawn. The Confederates came screaming out of the tree line, and Sherman's men ran. But Sherman did not run. He had a horse shot from under him. He got on another. That horse was shot. He got on another. 3 horses in one day. A bullet grazed his hand. He wrapped it with a cloth and kept fighting. That night, Grant found Sherman standing in the rain. Sherman looked at Grant and said, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day, haven't we?" Grant chewed his cigar. "Yes," he said. "Lick 'em tomorrow, though." That was it. That was the beginning of the most devastating military partnership in American history. No speeches, no drama. Just 2 men standing in the rain, one of them crazy, one of them drunk, both of them about to win the war. Sherman later said it plainly. "Grant stood by me when I was crazy, and I stood by him when he was drunk. And now we stand by each other always." That is not a military alliance. That is something deeper. That is 2 broken men who found in each other the piece they were missing. When Grant went east to face Lee in 1864, He left Sherman the entire Western Theater, 62,000 men, the largest independent command any general had been given. Grant did not give Sherman detailed instructions. He did not need to. He simply said, "Go south, break things, end this." Sherman looked at the map. He looked at Georgia, and he said 5 words that would become the overture to hell. "I can make Georgia howl." Sherman spent 4 months getting to Atlanta. 100 days of maneuvering, flanking, fighting. He lost 3,000 men at Kennesaw Mountain when he tried a frontal assault, and he never made the same mistake again. He flanked Johnston out of every position. When Hood replaced Johnston, Sherman said Hood would fight and he would lose. Hood attacked at Peachtree Creek. Sherman was right. Hood attacked at the Battle of Atlanta. Sherman was right again. Hood attacked at Ezra Church. Sherman was right a third time. On September 2nd, 1864, Atlanta fell, and Sherman did something that changed the war, changed history, and changed the way the world understood what war could be. He told the civilians to leave. The mayor of Atlanta begged him not to destroy the city. Sherman sat down and wrote a letter. He wrote it in 20 minutes. He did not revise it. He did not need to. That letter is now studied in every war college on earth. It is the most famous piece of military correspondence ever written, and its central argument is brutal in its honesty. War is cruelty, and you cannot refine it. And those who brought war into our country deserve all the curses and maledictions a people can pour out. You cannot qualify war in harsher terms than I will. Sherman was not apologizing. Sherman was not threatening. Sherman was explaining. He was telling the mayor of Atlanta a truth that the mayor did not want to hear. This war was brought upon us, and I am going to end it by making it so terrible that nobody will ever want to start another one. On November 15, 1864, Sherman burned Atlanta. 90% of the city was destroyed. The fires were so large they could be seen from miles away. His men marched out of the burning city singing. Behind them, the sky was red. Ahead of them, Georgia waited, and Georgia had no idea what was coming. Sherman looked at the fire. He understood fire better than any man alive. He understood that fire does not negotiate. Fire does not make exceptions. Fire does not care about your politics, your property, your prayers. Fire simply burns. And that was exactly what Sherman intended to do. What Sherman did next, nobody thought was possible. Military historians still argue about whether it was genius or madness. Most of them have settled on both. He cut his supply lines, all of them. He abandoned his telegraph. He told his army of 62,000 men that from this moment forward, they would live off the land. They would eat what Georgia grew. They would burn what Georgia built. They would take what Georgia had. Then he disappeared. For 5 weeks, nobody in the North knew where Sherman was. Lincoln did not know. Grant did not know. Sherman had marched into the interior of enemy territory with no supply line, no communication, and no retreat plan. He had simply vanished into Georgia, like a man walking into a burning building. Lincoln, when asked about Sherman's silence, said something remarkable. "I know what hole he went in, but I can't tell you what hole he'll come out of." Sherman's men marched 300 miles from Atlanta to Savannah. They cut a path of destruction 60 miles wide. They destroyed 425 miles of railroad track. His men heated the rails over bonfires, then twisted them around telegraph poles and trees. They called them Sherman's neckties, and some of those twisted rails are still in museums today. They took everything. The order said forage liberally, and the soldiers, the bummers they were called, took that order and ran with it. They took food, livestock, horses, cotton, silver. They burned cotton gins because cotton was the South's money. They burned barns, bridges, plantation houses, though Sherman spared some when the owners had been kind to their slaves. Sherman estimated the total damage at $100 million. He said 80 million of it was, in his own words, wanton destruction. He admitted it. He did not apologize. That was Sherman. He was honest the way a blade is sharp. It cut in both directions, and as his army marched through Georgia, something else happened. something Sherman had not planned for, something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The slaves came out. 25,000 freed slaves walked out of the plantations and followed Sherman's army. They came with nothing, no shoes, no food, no idea where they were going. They called Sherman Moses. He was uncomfortable with it. And then came the darkest day, December 9th, 1864. Sherman's army reached Ebenezer Creek in Georgia. It was a deep, swollen, ice-cold creek, not a river, but deadly enough. Sherman's engineer, General Jefferson C. Davis, built a pontoon bridge for the troops to cross. Behind the troops, hundreds of freed slaves followed. They had been walking for days. They had nowhere else to go. They trusted this army. They trusted that freedom meant something. The troops crossed, the wagons crossed, the artillery crossed, and then Jefferson Davis ordered the pontoon bridge cut. He cut it, with the freed slaves still on the other side. Hundreds of men, women, and children were stranded on the wrong side of Ebenezer Creek. Confederate cavalry was closing in behind them. They could hear the horses. They could hear the gunshots. They panicked. They rushed into the water. Ebenezer Creek was freezing. It was deep. Many of them could not swim. They went in anyway because the only alternative was capture, and capture meant being returned to slavery. Some of them made it across. Many of them did not. Nobody knows exactly how many drowned at Ebenezer Creek. The estimates range from dozens to hundreds. The exact number is lost to history, buried in a creek in Georgia, along with the bodies. Sherman did not order it. He was miles ahead when it happened. But he was the commanding general. It happened under his command. It happened to people who followed his army. It happened because his army did not protect them. When Secretary of War Stanton came to Savannah to investigate, Sherman was forced to sit in a room with 20 black ministers. Stanton asked the ministers what they wanted. Their answer was simple and devastating. Land. Give us land. We can take care of ourselves if you give us land. Sherman listened, and 4 days later, he wrote Special Field Order Number 15, 400,000 acres in total. It was the most radical land redistribution order in American history. And then Andrew Johnson became president, and he gave every acre back to the plantation owners. The promise of 40 acres and a mule, the most important broken promise in American history, died before it was ever truly born. Sherman said nothing. That silence is its own kind of hell. On December 21st, 1864, Sherman emerged from his silence. He took Savannah without a fight. The city simply surrendered. After 5 weeks of watching Georgia burn, Savannah decided that resistance was not worth what it would cost. Sherman sat down and wrote a telegram to Abraham Lincoln. It might be the most remarkable telegram in American history. It read, in essence, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah." Lincoln received it on December 22nd. Christmas was 3 days away. The president, who had spent 4 years watching young men die, read a telegram from a general, giving him a city for Christmas. For the first time in a long time, the Union had something to celebrate. But Sherman was not done. He turned north, into the Carolinas. And South Carolina, the state that had started the war, the state that had fired the first shot at Fort Sumter, South Carolina got it worse than Georgia. Columbia, the capital, burned. Sherman said the wind did it. Nobody believed him. Nobody cared. South Carolina had started this, and Sherman believed that those who started wars deserved to feel what war was. His men continued north, through North Carolina, burning, marching, destroying, until finally, on April 26, 1865, Confederate General Joseph Johnston surrendered his army at Bennett Place, North Carolina. It was the last major Confederate army to lay down its arms. And then Sherman did something nobody expected. He gave Johnston surrender terms so generous that Washington nearly fired him for it. He offered amnesty. He offered recognition of state governments. He offered terms that went far beyond what Grant had given Lee at Appomattox. Washington rejected the terms immediately. Secretary of War Stanton publicly attacked Sherman. The newspapers turned on him again. The same newspapers that had called him insane 3 years earlier now called him a traitor. Sherman was furious, and at the Grand Review in Washington, when 200,000 people watched the Union armies parade through the Capitol, Sherman marched at the head of his army, and when Secretary Stanton extended his hand, Sherman refused to shake it, in public, in front of the entire nation. He looked at Stanton's hand, and he walked past it. That was Sherman. He did not forgive, he did not forget, and he did not pretend. The war ended. Sherman was the second most famous man in America, behind only Grant. Both political parties wanted him for president. The Republicans asked. The Democrats asked him personally. Sherman's answer was 18 words that became the most famous refusal in American political history. If nominated, I will not accept. If elected, I will not serve. That was it. No negotiation. No maybe. No, let me think about it. 18 words and done. The man who burned Georgia did not want to govern it. The man who won the war did not want to profit from it. In an age when every general turned his medals into political currency, Sherman threw his away. The pastoral was over. The great king was to be in every fourth commission possible to believe. The specter of the German soldiers was there, putting some effort in a state of crime, and nodding the medal down, nodding the wave of the best ways. My friend crossed the field. Nodding, their face was deferred to bury the cessitary commission, and now there lay away in a face of right. Be big enough, or ever. He became general of the army. He served for 15 years, overseeing the Indian Wars on the plains, applying the same scorched earth tactics to Native Americans that he had used against the South. He ordered the destruction of the buffalo herds to starve the Plains Indians. This is the chapter nobody wants to talk about. The fire he set in Georgia did not go out on the plains. It burned a different people, and the scars are still visible today. He moved Army headquarters from Washington to St. Louis just to get away from politicians. He said he hated politicians more than he hated the Confederacy. And through all of this, he carried something that never left him. In October 1863, at Vicksburg, his son Willie died of typhoid fever. Willie was 9 years old. He was Sherman's favorite child. The hardest man in the army broke. Sherman wrote a letter about Willie's death that is still, 160 years later, one of the most heartbreaking documents in American history. The man who burned cities, who destroyed farms, who twisted railroad rails into bow ties, that man wept over the body of a 9-year-old boy and wrote words that would make stone cry. He retired in 1884. He moved to New York City and became, of all things, a socialite. He went to the theater every night. He attended 50 events a year. He was charming. He was witty. He was the most popular dinner guest in New York society. The man who had burned a path of destruction across 3 states was gentle in peace. 2 different men lived inside William Tecumseh Sherman, and both of them were real. On February 14th, 1891, Valentine's Day, William Tecumseh Sherman died. He was 71 years old. He caught a cold that became pneumonia, and the body that had survived 3 horses shot under him at Shiloh, survived a mental breakdown, survived a march through hell, could not survive a winter in New York. They buried him in St. Louis, not Arlington, his choice, a simple stone for a complex man, Calvary Cemetery. Far from Washington, far from the politicians he despised, far from the battlefields that made him and broke him. But the most remarkable thing about Sherman's death is not how he died. It is what happened at his funeral. Joseph Johnston came, the Confederate general who had fought Sherman across Georgia, the man who had surrendered to Sherman at Bennett Place, the man who Sherman had offered terms so generous that Washington rejected them. Johnston was 84 years old. It was February. It was freezing. It was raining. Johnston stood bareheaded at Sherman's funeral. Someone told him to put his hat on. He would catch his death of cold. Johnston said, "If I were in his place, and he were standing here in mine, he would not put on his hat." 5 weeks later, Joseph Johnston was dead. Pneumonia, caught at Sherman's funeral, the Confederate general killed by his refusal to dishonor the Union general who had burned his country. The war was finally over. And those 3 words, "War is hell," still echo. They echo in every bombed city, in every refugee column, in every field hospital. Sherman said them in 1879 to a room full of boys who had never seen combat. He said them because he had seen what war does to cities, to farms, to families, to the human mind. He had seen it burn through him and leave scars that never healed. Sherman did not say war is hell to be quoted. He said it to warn. He said it because he was honest the way a blade is sharp. He had walked through that fire, and he did not want those boys to walk through it too. 160 years later, we are still walking through it. And Sherman is still right. War is hell, and nobody has ever said it better, because nobody has ever meant it more. If this story set something on fire inside you, subscribe to the Sherman Archive, because history does not repeat itself, but it burns in the same places.